First slide. It says, be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. I have the King James, which says, let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. The New King James says, let your waist be girded and your lamps burning. And the New American Standard Bible says, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Now, this gives us a little bit of an idea of how the different translations are. Some translations are word for word, and some translations are thought for thought. And the word for word is, let your loins be girded. And the translators of the New Revised Standard and the New American Standard translate it, be dressed in readiness. So what they've done is they've taken a figure of speech and they've translated it into English what it actually means. Next slide, please. An idiom, the phrase gird your loins, suggests that you should prepare yourself mentally or physically for something that's rather difficult or challenging. It's like the old-timey version of buckle your seatbelts or brace yourself, but with a lot more garment-related confusion involved. And that's kind of the trouble with the scriptures. If you don't understand the culture from which it was written, then it can easily be misinterpreted. Gird your loins actually does mean get ready to do something. I mean, we have many expressions in English that don't mean, the actual sentence doesn't mean what it conveys. Like if I said he kicked the bucket, we would understand that he didn't actually kick a bucket, he actually died. And it's raining cats and dogs. It's not really raining cats and dogs, it's raining, but it's raining very heavily. And so this is a figure of speech, and I want to talk about this throughout the lesson today, because Jesus here, he's teaching something which is very surprising. And if you didn't know that it was in the Bible, you might not think that Jesus would be teaching this particular lesson. Next slide. So here's an example, hopefully, here's an example of what it means to gird your loins. In the upper right, we have the ordinary first century man who lives in Israel, and he has a tunic on. So what he does, in the next slide to the right, he reaches down, he pulls it up. Then in the next slide, he pulls it together, and then he pulls it underneath and to the back like a diaper. Then he pulls it up under his belt in the front, and then he's ready for war. Or he's ready to run, or he's ready to do something that he can't do because he's restricted by his clothing. So when it says gird your loins and let your light shine, it means get ready to do something. Now, next slide, please. Here we have the Jewish menorah. Have you seen this before? The 7-branch menorah. The other Jewish menorah has eight candle parts on the top there. Actually, it was an oil lamp. The one that has 8 is for the 8 days of Hanukkah, but the one that's in the old temple at the time of Moses had 7 branches on the lampstand. And in the 2,000 years BC, when they built the tabernacle and later they had the temple, the lampstand was one of the most important pieces of furniture in their central worship. And Jesus said, you are the light of the world. Now, every other place where it talks about the light of the world, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. But in this particular passage, he says, you are the light of the world, and that you should be ready to gird your loins. You should prepare yourself for what is about to come. Now, Matt, do you keep yourself in long underwear in the winter? You keep it on? You don't prepare it? You just go out and freeze to death when you get a call? Okay. He's warm-blooded? Well, unlike you, I keep a pair of long underwear on all winter. Yeah. Well, when you were in the road down here that day, and there were others in the fire department in the road, and they kept saying, "Get in the car and warm up." And I said, "I'm not cold." I was prepared. I had my long underwear on. I had my hat. I had my gloves. I had my coat, and they were freezing because they were, in my opinion, not prepared. And if you had been out there, you'd probably been freezing too. This goes for almost anything in life. It's the Boy Scout motto, isn't it, Caleb? Be prepared. Jesus said, be prepared. Gird up your loins. Be prepared. Well, be prepared for what? Sometimes I do financial counseling for people. They come and we look at their finances, and they need this much for their housing, and they need this much for their car, and they need this much for food. And then they forget that they also need this much for emergency. And a lot of people don't put the emergency in what they think, and they look at their bank account and they say, "Oh, I got money." But somewhere down the line, within a month or two, there's going to be something wrong with the car, and you're going to have to get it fixed, or you're going to have to go to the doctor, and you're going to have to buy some sort of prescription, or there are eventualities that you need to be prepared for, which is what Jesus is talking about. But what he's talking about is be prepared to serve God. Now it says, you are the light of the world. Now this particular lampstand, let me see the next slide there, Tally. Oh, I need to move mine forward. The Star of David. The lampstand we see is like this. But the real lampstand had equal number of things. They weren't little like this. They were the same size as the big one. So they came out here like this, and they came out here like this. And if you look down on the top of it, it's the Jewish Star of David. The light, the Christians are said to be the light of the world. The Jews are said to be the light of the world. And Jesus said, you are a city set on a hill. Now, let me just kind of go sideways a little bit here. So 2,000 years before Jesus, thereabouts, the seven-branch lampstand was put in the temple and in the tabernacle. Now 400 years BC, which is roughly 1,600 years after the first light was put in the temple, Zechariah the prophet, he sees this vision, and that's an angel, said to me, "What do you see?" He said, "I see and behold a lampstand all of gold, with its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps which are on top of it." So, prophetically, Zechariah looks back to the 7-branch lampstand. He sees a vision in heaven. The angel says, "What do you see?" And he sees a 7 times 7 lampstand, so that each of these also has 7. And if you look at the book of Revelation, the letter is written to the 7 churches in Asia. 7 is the number of completeness. There are 7 days in a week. There are 7 weeks between the Jewish feast of Passover and Pentecost, which is the 50th day, so 49. They had a sabbatical year. Every 7 years they would take a year off, and then after 7 sevens in the years, there was the year of Jubilee. So 7 is always the idea of completion. And so Jesus said, "Gird your loins and let your lamp be lit." Now let's talk about the rest of the story. That's the background for what we're going to next. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet. What do you do at a wedding banquet? So that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. In Revelation chapter, Jesus is portrayed as standing at the door and knocking on the door. He comes to our heart and he knocks on the door of our heart, and we must let him in. We must listen to what he has to say. We must make room for him. And so Jesus said, it's like those who are waiting for their master to return. You know, there are certain things in the Bible that are basically fundamental. And these are the things that all true Christian churches believe, officially. Now, maybe individuals in the church don't believe it. But those things are, Jesus was born of a virgin. He lived a sinless life. He died on the cross. He rose again from the dead, and he ascended into heaven. Doesn't matter if you're Greek Orthodox, Catholic, Methodist, doesn't matter. Those are the things that are in the Apostles' Creed and in the Nicene Creed, and those are the things which are Christianity. And so this story is about the Master returning. This is about the second coming of Jesus. And this is really kind of something that wasn't understood. Jesus taught this, but they didn't understand that Jesus had to be ascended into heaven. I forgot that one. That's one as well. Ascended into heaven and will return at the end of the age. And so Jesus is telling the story of what the people of God are supposed to do in the meantime, which is gird their loins and let their light shine. That's what the church is. That's what the people of God are. What will happen if his servants are ready? Now, this is kind of surprising to me. There are several stories about weddings in the Bible, and this was only found in Luke. What will happen if the servants are ready? Sean is a really good housekeeper. Aren't you, baby? Yes, she is. You can come to our house anytime. Pretty much, well, if the family is there, all bets are off. But if we're there alone, that place is clean. She's ready for guests. We're supposed to be ready. Jesus is coming back. When? We don't know. People have postulated what that might be throughout the ages, and they've always been wrong. Next slide. Blessed are those slaves the master finds alert. Truly, I tell you, look at this. He will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will serve them. That's surprising. He's been out to the wedding all day, probably occurred in the morning, and they've been, they drank wine in the wedding. Jesus was at the wedding in Cana and changed the water into wine. That was a party time. He's been gone all day. It's now night. He comes back and he finds out that his people have taken care of his house properly. And then he will gird his loins and serve you. Surprising, right? Isn't it all? We always think about the other way, about us serving him. It says in the King James, blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. I say that he shall gird himself and make them sit down to meat, which means to eat, because they ate meat, and will come forth and serve them. Next slide. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn, and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. I got up early today to bring the snowblower over, and when I came out of my driveway with the snowblower at about 4 o'clock in the morning, our plow guy was here, and he was done plowing. He was coming out of here, and he even plowed in the front, which our other plow guy didn't do. He did put a big pile of snow here. The other guy didn't do that either. But he was ready. He was prepared. He watched the news. He knew that it was going to snow. And it says, if he comes during the middle of the night, if Jesus comes back in the middle of the night, are we in a place where we have taken care of his house? Or if he comes back near dawn. I think in other places in the Bible it says, you don't know whether he's coming at midnight or cock crowing which is 3, or in the morning, because they divided the night by 3 hours. And by the way, no extra charge for this, but when Jesus said to Peter, "You'll deny me 3 times by the time the cock crows twice," that cock crows twice, that's the 3 o'clock in the morning alert that it's the middle of the night. Jesus is coming back. It might be in the daytime, it might be in the nighttime. We have to be ready. I have to be ready. I have to have this sermon done every week. I have to be prepared for the sheriff to call when somebody needs counseling or whatever. Do you ever think about getting ready for church maybe the night before? The Jewish day is not our day. If you read Genesis, it says he created the heavens and the earth, and he says evening and morning, one day. The Sabbath of the Jews starts on Friday night at sundown, and our worship starts at sundown on Saturday night, because that's what the Jewish day is. We should think about, what are we going to do when we get to church? Are we going to be ready to have an encouraging word for somebody? Are we going to be ready to maybe prepared to look at the sermon, because what's coming next week? All you have to do is read ahead, one paragraph, and maybe have a question or maybe have a comment. We're supposed to be ready. We're supposed to take care of the house of God. We're supposed to take care of the people of God. We're supposed to gird our loins and let our light shine. That's what Jesus is teaching. Next slide. Waiting on the master keeps the thief out. Know this: if the owner of the house had known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. We have a security system at our house, and if Sean doesn't turn it off, but when you walk up on the porch, it says, "You are being recorded," because we don't want anybody coming into our house and, stealing our coffee or anything. If the people of God are taking care of the house of God, no thief can break in. Now, usually, the thief in the scripture, the devil is the thief. But in this passage, Jesus is the thief. So, these metaphors, they only go so far when you think about it. Why should we be ready? Because the Lord might come back, and if you knew what hour he was coming, your house would not be broken into. Well, Jesus is coming back on, what was it, October 12th, 1988. I've been around a long time. This guy, Edgar, was not. There's no extra charge for this, and it has nothing to do with the sermon, but there have been people who have predicted when Jesus is coming back. The Seventh-day Adventists predicted Jesus would return, I think, in 1843 or 1844, and then they call that the Great Disappointment. Everybody was, and it happened right here. All the strange stuff happened right here in Western New York, because people were just moving in here at the time. And Edgar Whisenant wrote this book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. I mentioned this last week. But what I didn't mention was the sequel, which was 89 Reasons Jesus is Coming Back in 89. And then the third book was, each one didn't sell as much as the previous one. Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1992. But Jesus didn't tell us when he's coming back. In fact, the disciples asked him, if you look at Matthew 24 and Luke 13, when we get to Luke 13, it's all the end time stuff. Be sure to be here for that. Jesus, when will these things take place and when will you come back? It's not for you to know. That's what it says. Nobody knows, not even the angels in heaven. Only the Father who's in heaven knows when. So when anybody says it's going to be here or there, whatever time or whatever day, forget it. They don't know what they're talking about. But the fact is, he is coming back. If you had known when he was coming, your house would not be broken into. So it's by design that we don't know the return of Christ, but it's one of the pillars of the Christian faith that Jesus was ascended into heaven and will return to the earth to be the king of the earth. Next slide, please. You also must be ready. The Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Well, I come from a background of Christians that think they know all these things. This is going to happen, and 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 they've got it all figured out. They don't say what day it is, but they know the sequence of exactly what's going to happen. And I say this: the people who knew the Bible at the coming of Christ did not interpret it properly. They thought they knew what Messiah was going to be. They thought they knew that Messiah would ride in on a white horse. They thought the Messiah would come and destroy their enemies and make them the leading nation in the world. And so when the suffering servant came, they could not accept him because, number one, he didn't speak the same dialect of Aramaic as he was from up there in Galilee. That made a huge difference in those days when 50 miles they had a completely different accent. And they knew that the scripture said that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, but all they could see was that he was a Galilean. And they had all of these ideas about what was going to happen in the first coming of Christ, and they totally missed it. So if the people totally missed it in the first coming of Christ, I think a large portion of the Christians are going to miss it. Now, there are certain things, let me hasten to say this as well, though. There are certain things that are predicted in the book of Revelation and in different places which say the time will come where there will be a beast, and the beast will be given the authority to speak and will require a number or name on the hand or forehead. Now, in 1980, when I was first involved in Christian ministry, and in 88, this wasn't possible. But technologically, it is now possible to put a chip in somebody's hand that they can't buy or sell anything unless they have that chip. So I think we are closer. It says that the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. When they are saying peace and safety, I think I got that scripture on here somewhere. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But you are not in darkness so that you should be deceived. Okay. So Peter, St. Peter, he's like the head Catholic guy. First Pope. Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone? It's like the lady. I'm in the back of the church, and she comes by, shakes my hand, and she said, "That was a great sermon, Pastor. It applies to a lot of people I know." Jesus, are you talking to us, or are you talking to the... Peter certainly was a great apostle and a great man, but he made a lot of mistakes. If you read carefully the Gospels, he wasn't always right up on top of what Jesus was doing. And so Jesus answered in a very Jewish way by answering with a question that doesn't answer the question but does. The question is, who then is the faithful and prudent manager whom his master will put in charge of his slaves and give them their allowance of food at the proper time? Who are you speaking to? Jesus speaks back, who is the one who's doing it and does it so well that they gain a promotion? So he doesn't answer the question directly, but his answer means it applies to anybody who can hear it and anybody who can't hear it. Who is the faithful and prudent manager? Next slide, please. Blessed is that slave whom his master will find at work when he arrives. I tell you, he will put that one in charge of all his possessions. Now, there's a big argument. I mean, from the time of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther looked at the book of Romans, and he found that it taught that people are justified by faith alone. And the Catholics said, no, faith and works, which is also what the Apostle James wrote in the Bible. Faith and works. Now, faith is the important thing. And here Ryle says this: the point is not what a man should do to be saved, that requires faith, but what a saved person or man, Ryle said man, ought to do. Who is the person who is working and taking care of not only their own house, but the house of God? How many are letting their light shine to the world around and being a person of responsibility in the kingdom of God? So his answer to Peter was, it applies to anybody who can hear. Next slide. But yeah, I typed in drunkard in Google and came up with this guy here. He's had too many. But if that slave says to himself, my master's delayed, he's not coming back. If he begins to beat the other slaves, can't get along with the other Christians, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk. See that first word, but? If Jesus finds people taking care of his house, having their loins girded, letting their light shine, when he comes back, he'll gird himself and he will serve us a meal. He will be very happy. But if we start to be mean and nasty and beat the other people around us and think that life is just about being in the here and now and spend our life in what the Bible calls in the letters dissipation, just drug use and just you know what the list is. Next slide. The master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, in an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces. What a surprising ending to this story. Now, there are people that say there is no such thing as hell. Did you ever read Jesus? You know, most people don't know anything about what Jesus taught. This is this isn't really, even when I read it this week when I was working on it, it just surprises me at the viciousness of the punishment. Thessalonians. This is a letter to the church written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Thessalonica, Greek believers. For you yourself know very well the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, when they say, there's peace and security. Is there peace and security right now in the world? In Israel? No. So there's one clue. When they say there's sudden destruction will come upon them, as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and there will be no escape. So it just gets more and more and more painful, closer and closer together. But you, beloved, are not in darkness, that day should surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light and children of the day, and are not of night nor of darkness. That's a really pretty high view that Paul had of the believers. Yes, it's going to be a secret to those who are unaware, but you are not unaware, because you have your loins girded, and you are letting your light shine. Next slide, please. The slave who knew what his master wanted but did not prepare himself or do what was wanted will receive a severe beating. You know, there was no such thing in ancient Israel. There was no such thing as jail. There's no punishment of jail in the law of Moses. Well, what did they do? Well, there were punishments that fit the crime. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And a theft for a theft. So if you poke somebody's eye out on purpose, then the punishment was that no jail. You lose your eye. If you steal from somebody and you're caught, you repay fourfold. If you do something really heinous, and what we would put somebody in jail for, they would take them down in the middle of the street and put them in stocks and beat them. And when the beating was over, then they would go home. So Jesus says, if you know what to do, you know what the master wants, but don't prepare yourself or do what was wanted, you will receive a severe beating. Well, then the question goes, what about those that don't know? And he answers that in the next verse. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and to the one whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. So this is you, folks. We know what to do. We know that we need to be prepared to serve God. We know we need to be ready to wait. We don't know when he's coming. You know, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get called out in the middle of the night. And you got to be prepared to do that. You got to be available to help somebody when they need help. So to everyone whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. But according to the earlier passage, it says here more will be demanded, but in the earlier verse it says, and he will put them in charge of all of his house. So it's faithfulness and its works. It's faith and its works. That's what Jesus taught. So to get back to the first verse, which is the central verse of this whole passage, be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. What do you have to say? Yes, we're going to use a microphone because there are people, hopefully all of the people who are sick are home watching this on live stream.
So a couple of things. One, when I first when I first knew enough to know that I needed to give my life to Christ, and I actually was probably about 10 years old, but I had read and studied, and my mother took all of us kids to church every Sunday, you know, and I knew, and it bothered me because I had read about some of this, and the end times really scared me even at 10 years old. And the same thing was going on back in the late 60s, early 70s, the end time, you know, it was being predicted all over the news. We were living in the end times. And I was so worried, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, how much longer do we have? And she said, and she asked me, did you read about that you won't know? And I said, yeah, nobody's going to know, but everybody's saying, and she said, look, as long as they're predicting the end times are now, you don't have anything to worry about because they don't know.
When they say peace and safety.
Exactly. So that was one thing. And it was really, she knew the words I needed to hear at that point in my life because I was very upset about that. And that calmed me right down. Second thing, the verse where Christ is comparing himself to a thief is amazing to me. I had always read that as the owner of the house was Christ and the thief was Satan. And it wasn't until I was studying for today's sermon that I realized, oh, I had that backwards. Because the very next verse, he kind of parallels that he's talking about the thief being himself coming. That just blew me away. I still am not.
Only the suddenness of the appearance.
The suddenness of not
You,
the
you
purpose.
can't can't take it beyond that.
It just amazed me. That amazed me. So that was a real amazement to me.
Anyone else? Lori's going to help us out with some comments.
A verse in the Bible which struck me years ago is out of Matthew. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Relates to what you were talking about today.
Anyone else? When we get up to chapter 13, we're going to talk a lot more specifically about this because that whole chapter is about the end times. But that's several weeks from now. Well, thank you for braving the snow. You might want to keep a pair of underwear on. Prepare yourself for the freeze because I might not be there. You might be stuck at that intersection the whole time. You don't have time for that. No. Yes. That works well. Yeah, that I did get. I wasn't adequately prepared that day. Yeah, I did not own a yellow. What do they call it? With the. No, the bars that shine at night. Yeah, I didn't have a raincoat with that. That was proper to be in the road, so I was a little bit wet. And I wasn't prepared for that to happen. No, we went down for another kind of call first. And then when we were on the call, it rained and rained and rained and rained, and we never got back. I think we had 48 calls that day. Did we ever get money back for that? So, okay. God bless you. Thank you for coming. Annual meeting next week, and we will see you then, I hope.